For the third time in 30 years, the debt ceiling in a divided Washington is presenting an opportunity for America to put its fiscal house in order. But this is the first time that America's partisan fiscal brinksmanship over the debt ceiling is taking on global importance. This is because with the U.S. national debt on the verge of a death spiral, the dollar's global reserve currency status is facing increasing pressure amidst the intensifying power struggle between the U.S.-led unipolar world and a multipolar one. Will America rise to the occasion and bite the bullet? How will the extreme polarization of American politics influence the outcome of the crisis? How strong is America's real commitment to its continued global economic hegemony? The Greek philosopher Aristotle famously said that regarding the politics of the city-state, that heterogeneity or dissimilarity leads to factional conflict. And ever since Aristotle, it's become a received wisdom among political scientists that extreme differences in culture, status, income, and wealth, in other words, extreme diversity, is not conducive to democracy. Democracy is about the search for consensus and compromise. Extreme differences divide a society and make compromise and consensus more difficult. In this respect, it is perhaps not too surprising when we look at democracy surveys today. Countries always at the top, namely Scandinavian countries, are notable for the relative homogeneity of their populations. What about the United States? In the 2022 Democracy Index compiled by the Economist Intelligence Unit, the United States was ranked only in 30th place, behind Greece and just ahead of Botswana. The EIU labels the US as a flawed democracy. Moreover, America's democracy score has been declining every year since the survey began in 2006. For 2023, the Freedom House gives the US only 83 out of 100 points for political rights and civil liberties. The US gets only 3 out of 4 points for fair electoral laws and impartial implementation by election management bodies. The US gets only 3 out of 4 points for free and independent media. The US gets only 2 out of 4 points for equal treatment of various segments of the population. The United States is one of the most diverse countries in the world. Is it possible that its diversity has become a problem for its democracy? Political polarization, which the Pew Research Center defines as the vast and growing gap between liberals and conservatives, Republicans and Democrats, has been on the rise in the US. Political polarization has become so extreme that in the most recent quarterly polarization survey conducted by Unbound, 38% of Americans said that political instability in the US is either very or extremely threatened by the political division of the American people. Moreover, the same survey found that 22% of Americans believe people who do not share their political beliefs threaten the country's well-being. The current debt ceiling crisis illustrates the extreme division of public opinions across party lines in the US today. In an NPR-PBS Morris poll released on May 23rd, 73% of Republicans say that they would blame Biden if the debt ceiling is not raised and the country ends up defaulting. 75% of Democrats said that they would blame the Republicans in Congress in the event of a default. A CNN poll released on the same day showed that 73% of Democrats are concerned that the Democratic Party will give up too much in a negotiation versus just 26% of Democrats who were concerned about a default. Exactly the same number of Republicans, 73%, said that they're concerned that their party will give up too much, versus only 27% who said they're concerned about a default. What this means is that if politicians in either camps were to compromise, they will be accused by their supporters of selling out. If they choose not to compromise, they can easily deflect the blame on the other side in the event of failure. The incentive is clearly not to compromise. It is clear that polarization is making compromise difficult, if not impossible. This is why the fiscal brinksmanship over the debt ceiling is a dangerous game that will test the resilience of American democracy today. Given that the conduct of U.S. foreign policy under Biden has been framed as a battle between democracy and authoritarian regimes, how the U.S. resolve the debt ceiling debacle is something that the whole world will be watching closely. It is tempting, but it would be wrong to think that the fight over the debt ceiling is actually about fiscal responsibility. The Republicans simply do not have a better track record when it comes to fiscal responsibility than the Democrats. For example, under George W. Bush and Trump, America's structural primary budget balance deteriorated more than under Obama and even Biden. The current debate over the debt ceiling is less about debt and more about the size of the government. The Republicans believe in a smaller government, whereas the Democrats believe in a larger role for the state. As one political commentator put it, American politics is a contest about the scope of government, to whom and for what it should provide, and its reach. To reduce the scope and reach of government, the Republicans' instinct is to cut taxes. To increase the scope and reach of government, the Democrats' instinct is to spend more. Neither cutting taxes nor increasing spending helps the deficit. This is why U.S. government debt is at $31 trillion today. Fiscal responsibility does not sit at the top of the agenda for most mainstream Republican and Democratic politicians. This is because fiscal responsibility has not been kind to political careers. A famous example is the career of George Bush, the senior. His decision to raise taxes in 1990 probably cost him a second term. Ironically, a divided Washington offers the best opportunity for restoring fiscal sanity in America. This is what happened following the midterm election of 2010 during Obama's first term. In that election, the Democrats lost their majority in the House. Because raising the debt ceiling requires approval by both houses of Congress, the Republicans were able to play hardball with Obama and force him to agree to real spending cuts. Another example is what happened after the midterm election of 1994 during Bill Clinton's first term. In that election, the Republicans managed to gain control of both the Senate and the House. This led to the famous 1995-1996 government shutdown, without which the Balanced Budget Act of 1997 might never have been adopted. Because fiscal responsibility is almost never rewarded politically, the combination of the debt ceiling and a divided Washington is the best, if not the only recipe for fiscal discipline in America. This is why there's so much writing on whether the current brinksmanship over the debt ceiling can produce tangible fiscal improvement. If the current favorable political configuration in Washington does not succeed in injecting some needed fiscal discipline, we might have to wait a very long time for the next opportunity to come knocking at the door. With the debt to GDP ratio at 100% and ballooning interest payments on government debt, the U.S. does not have the luxury to wait. Even if the Republicans manage to get the Democrats to agree to all their demands over the next week, it would only make a dent on the fiscal problem that the U.S. is facing. You certainly don't need to be a fiscal expert to understand why this is the case. In fiscal year 2022, federal spending is projected to total $6.3 trillion. This consists of mandatory spending of $4.1 trillion, discretionary spending of $1.7 trillion, and $475 billion of interest payments. Neither Republicans nor Democrats want to touch politically sensitive mandatory, mandated by law, spending that includes funding for Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Given that they cannot cut interest payments, all they can cut is discretionary spending. However, more than half of discretionary spending is defense and veteran benefits that the Republicans consider sacred. So this just leaves us with less than $1 trillion of non-military discretionary spending that includes everything from education to social services. The irony is that the Republicans, in their drive to cut government spending, have ring-fenced 85% of government spending before cutting a single dollar. The absurdity of the situation lies in the fact that the federal budget deficit is projected to be $1.4 trillion in fiscal year 2022. So even if all non-military discretionary spending is slashed to zero, the U.S. will still be running a budget deficit of $400 billion every year. The unpleasant reality is that for the U.S. to bring down the deficit to a more sustainable level, the U.S. will have to cut both military and defense spending as well as raise taxes. This is why the current debt ceiling crisis is an important litmus test of the political will to do the right thing. Regardless of what happens in the next week, the outcome of the debt ceiling crisis will send a strong signal to the world about America's seriousness in its commitment to the US dollar's continued hegemony. I don't know about you, I am holding my breath. Let me know what you think by posting your comments on the video.
If you got something out of this program, please hit like and subscribe to my free YouTube channel. If you want to learn more about my investment strategy, come visit us at davidwunbound.com. Thank you for listening.